On October 9, 1967, a man sat on a dirt floor with his hands tied behind his back. He looked up at the soldier standing over him and said, "I know you've come to kill me. Shoot, coward, you are only going to kill a man." Those were his last words, and the soldier hesitated. His name was Ernesto Che Guevara, and depending on who you ask, he was either the most romantic revolutionary who ever lived, or one of the most dangerous men of the 20th century. Teenagers wear his face on t-shirts. Governments put bounties on his head. He was a doctor who became a guerrilla, a poet who ordered executions, a man who gave up everything, money, family, comfort, to fight for an idea. But here's what most people never tell you. His final 24 hours were not glorious. They were cold, humiliating, and deeply, deeply human. And the story of how he died, who ordered it, who pulled the trigger, and what happened in that tiny schoolhouse in Bolivia is darker, more complicated, and more emotional than anything you've seen on a t-shirt. If you're new here, this channel does not sugarcoat history. We go where it's uncomfortable. We go where it's real. So hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear is the kind of history they don't teach in school. And once you know it, you can't unknow it. Let's go back, not to the execution, not yet. Let's go back to the moment everything started falling apart for Che, because that moment is not what you think it is. Most people assume Che Guevara was captured in some dramatic firefight, guns blazing, heroic last stand. The truth, he was caught because he was exhausted, starving, and betrayed. By late 1967, Che's Bolivian guerrilla campaign was already dying. He had arrived in Bolivia in late 1966 with enormous ambitions. He wanted to ignite a continent-wide revolution, starting in the Bolivian jungle and spreading across Latin America like wildfire. But Bolivia wasn't Cuba. The peasants didn't rise up to join him. The Communist Party of Bolivia, which he desperately needed, refused to support him. Even his old ally Fidel Castro back in Havana was suspiciously quiet. Che was running out of food, running out of men, running out of time. And then someone talked, a local informant. Some accounts say it was a captured guerrilla. Others point to peasants paid by the CIA. Gave Bolivian forces the location of Che's small, exhausted band of fighters moving through the Quebrada del Euro ravine. On October 8, 1967, Bolivian rangers, trained and advised by the CIA, surrounded them. The firefight lasted less than an hour. Che was shot in the leg. His rifle was damaged and jammed. He couldn't fight back. When a soldier grabbed him, Che reportedly said, "Do not shoot. I am more valuable to you alive than dead." And here's the part that almost nobody talks about. He was right. The CIA did want him alive. Their agent on the ground, a Cuban-American operative named Felix Rodriguez, confirmed it. Washington wanted Che questioned, studied, extracted for intelligence. So why was he executed the very next morning? That answer sits at the intersection of politics, fear, and one very nervous Bolivian government. And it changes everything about how you understand this story. Because the order to kill Che Guevara didn't come from where you think it did. He survived the night. That's the part that haunts this story. Che Guevara, wounded, captured, hands tied, spent his last night alive in a tiny, crumbling one-room schoolhouse in a village called La Higuera. Population, almost nobody. And in that schoolhouse, something happened that no documentary ever fully captures. Something deeply, painfully human. The village teacher, a young woman named Julia Cortez, was asked to guard him briefly while soldiers rotated shifts. She later recalled that Che looked at her and said her blackboard had a spelling mistake on it. A spelling mistake. This man, hours away from execution, leg wound seeping through his torn clothes, zip-tied to a post, was quietly correcting grammar. She said she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Neither do we. But don't let that small human moment fool you into thinking Che had accepted his fate. He hadn't. He spent that night trying to negotiate, trying to talk, trying to make himself valuable to anyone who would listen. He asked to speak with the Bolivian commander, General René Barrientos. The request was denied. He asked to speak with a lawyer, denied. He asked for paper to write, denied. What he didn't know, what nobody told him, was that by the time that night fell, his fate had already been decided. Not in La Higuera, not even in Bolivia's capital, La Paz. It had been decided in a room far away, by men in suits with clean hands. Here is what the declassified CIA documents, released decades later, actually show. The Bolivian president, General Barrientos, was terrified, not of Che the guerrilla, Che the martyr. If Che was put on trial, if he stood in a Bolivian courtroom and spoke, he would turn that courtroom into a stage. He had done it before. Castro had done it before. Revolutionary trials had a way of becoming revolutionary performances. Barrientos couldn't risk it, so he made the call: execute him, make it look like he died in combat, tell the world he was killed during the firefight. The CIA's Felix Rodriguez received the order via radio. And here is where history gets genuinely uncomfortable, because Rodriguez later said he personally opposed the execution. He wanted Che transferred to Panama for interrogation. He even sent urgent messages to Langley asking for intervention. Washington's response: silence. Sometimes silence is an answer. The morning of October 9, 1967, arrived gray and cold. One by one, soldiers were brought into the schoolhouse to shoot the captured guerrillas. It was a coordinated, systematic execution. Clinical, bureaucratic, almost boring in its horror. Che was last. The soldier chosen to execute him was a Bolivian ranger named Mario Terán. He had volunteered, reportedly, because 3 of his closest friends had been killed by Che's guerrillas weeks earlier. But when Terán walked into that room and saw Che standing there, upright, calm, eyes open, he froze. He walked back out. He couldn't do it. A sergeant pushed him back inside. And this time, Terán raised his rifle. Che looked at him not with fear, not with rage, but with something witnesses described as almost contempt. And then he said those words, the ones that would echo for decades: "Shoot, coward. You are only going to kill a man." Terán fired, not once, multiple times, deliberately avoiding the head and heart, following orders to make the wounds look consistent with battlefield injuries rather than execution. Che Guevara fell at 1:10 p.m. He was 39 years old. But here's the thing nobody prepared you for. The execution was supposed to end the myth of Che Guevara. Instead, and this is the darkest, most ironic twist in this entire story, it created it. Because of what happened after he died, what they did to his body, what they showed the world, and the one photograph that accidentally turned a dead revolutionary into an immortal icon. They thought showing his dead body would end it. They were wrong. In fact, what happened in the hours after Che Guevara's execution became one of the most bizarre, haunting, and historically significant aftermaths in modern history. And it started with a decision that was supposed to be practical, but became something almost biblical. The Bolivian military needed proof, not just for themselves, for the world, for Washington, for every government that had spent years hunting this man across 2 continents. So they loaded Che's body onto a helicopter and flew it to the nearby town of Vallegrande. And then they did something that, even today, historians struggle to fully explain. They laid his body out on a laundry sink in the local hospital, shirtless, eyes open, arms slightly extended, and they invited journalists and photographers to come in and take pictures. What happened next was not what they planned. The photographer Freddy Alborda took a series of images that day, and when those photographs circulated, when the world saw Che's body laid out, eyes open, expression almost peaceful, arms positioned at his sides, people didn't see a dead terrorist. They saw a pieta. They saw a figure that looked, unmistakably, like depictions of Jesus Christ taken down from the cross. Whether that was accidental or deeply subconscious, nobody knows. But the symbolism exploded across the world overnight. The Bolivian government had wanted to bury the myth. Instead, they had accidentally created an icon. Within weeks, that image was on posters across Paris, London, Buenos Aires, and New York. Students who had barely heard of Che Guevara were suddenly carrying his face through the streets during the 1968 uprisings. The t-shirt, the poster, the global symbol, all of it was born in that hospital laundry room in a tiny Bolivian town. The men who killed him had handed him immortality. But there's one more layer to this story. One more detail that makes this history feel less like a textbook and more like a tragedy written by someone with a very dark sense of humor. Before they buried him secretly in an unmarked grave, they cut off his hands. Both of them. Officially, it was for fingerprint identification purposes. But Che's hands were sent to Argentina, to Cuba, to various intelligence agencies as proof of death. They traveled across the world in formaldehyde while the rest of him was buried in the Bolivian dirt. It took 30 years to find his body. In 1997, 3 decades after his execution, a team of Cuban and Argentine forensic scientists finally located the remains of Che Guevara in an unmarked mass grave near Vallegrande Airport. He was identified through dental records and bone structure. His handless remains were flown to Cuba. Fidel Castro, the man many historians believe quietly abandoned Che in Bolivia, stood at the ceremony, weeping. Whether those were real tears or political theater, only Castro knew. And here is what this entire story actually teaches us. Not about revolution, not about Marxism, not even about the Cold War. It teaches us about the terrifying power of image. Che Guevara, the man, tired, betrayed, limping through the Bolivian jungle, correcting spelling mistakes on a blackboard in his final hours, was complicated, flawed, and deeply human. But Che Guevara, the symbol, frozen forever in that photograph, eyes open, expression eternal, became something governments cannot kill. Because you cannot execute an idea with a rifle. Bolivia tried, the CIA tried, and instead of a grave, they built a monument. That schoolhouse in La Higuera still stands today. Locals have turned it into a small shrine. People travel from across the world to stand in the room where he spent his last night alive, where he corrected a spelling mistake, where he refused to beg, where he looked a nervous soldier in the eyes and told him to shoot. And every single year on October 9th, flowers appear outside that door. Nobody organizes it. They just appear. If this video made you think, or made you feel something, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel bring more stories like this to people who actually care about real history. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop in the comments, do you think Che Guevara was a hero, a villain, or something far more complicated than either? Because history, as always, is never as simple as a t-shirt.